All right, good afternoon. Welcome to St. John's Law School. To those of you watching on YouTube Live, welcome to St. John's Law School. My name is Mike Simons. I'm the dean here at St. John's. And what we're going to do for the next hour or so is give you a taste of what it's like to be in law school. Get a feel for what an actual law school class is like. I teach criminal law here at St. John's. Criminal law is a required second semester first year course, so every student takes it in their second semester. And what we're going to do today is very much exactly what I do in the first criminal law class of the semester. I begin by talking with the students about the learning objectives for the course, and then we launch right into talking about a case, the famous case of the Queen versus Dudley and Stephens, the cannibals on the lifeboat, as a way of exploring the themes that are going to run throughout the course, and a way to begin working on one of the main skills that lawyers and law students need to develop, and that is logical argumentation. So let me start by showing you what my learning objectives are for the criminal law course. I have 5 primary learning objectives, and what lawyers need to learn, what law students need to learn, is either knowledge, skills, or values. So the first knowledge objective I have is teaching students the basics of criminal law doctrine. Right? What are the rules governing crimes and defenses? The second is training in legal analysis. That is taking the law that you know and then applying it to a new set of facts to, in criminal law, figure out if this person will be guilty or not guilty, whether this defense will or will not work. Criminal law all comes from statutes, laws passed by legislatures. And we spend a lot of time in the criminal law class working with students on the skill of reading a statute. And then the 4th and 5th learning objectives are what we're going to focus on today. Getting a basic understanding of the theoretical principles underlying the criminal law, not so that we can be philosophers, but so then that we can use those theoretical principles to make arguments. And that's the 5th learning objective. Teaching students how to construct an argument, how to understand an opposing side's argument, and how to respond. And that's primarily what we're going to work on today. There's a whole set of secondary learning objectives, some of which are about values and presentation skills. What I want to do today for us here is focus on these 2, objectives 4 and 5, getting a basic understanding of the principles underlying criminal law, and then using those principles in a concrete case to argue about what the result should be. Okay? So the case we're going to talk about is the Queen versus Dudley and Stephens. I need a volunteer. Who'd like to tell us a little bit about the facts of this case? Don't be shy. Raise your hands. What's your name? Danielle. So pause for a minute. Peggy's going to give you a microphone. Make sure it's on.
Thank you.
Okay, so Danielle.
Yes.
Who are the defendants in this case?
Thomas Dudley and Edwin Stephens.
Dudley and Stephens, exactly. When is this case taking place?
1884.
1884, where? Where are they being prosecuted?
Queen's Bench Division.
Yeah, what country do you think that's in?
England.
England, exactly, right? And the defendants are Dudley and Stephens. What are they charged with? What crime?
They were charged with the murder of Richard Parker.
Yeah, they're charged with murder, and the victim is Richard Parker. Tell me really briefly what happened in this case. Boil it down to 1 or 2 sentences.
Richard Parker, Dudley, and Stephens were on a boat. They were cast away, and it came to a point where they had not eaten for, I believe, 20 days.
That's
and
right.
they made the decision, Dudley and Stephens, to eat Parker.
Very good summary of the facts. You left out one thing. Before they ate him, what did they do to him? They killed him.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, it's the killing, not the eating, that leads to the charge of murder. Tell me your name again?
Danielle.
Danielle. Danielle did a great job boiling down the facts to their essentials. Thank you. I want to fill out the facts a little more. There have been entire books written about this case because it frames the issues involved in criminal law so neatly for us. This is a painting, an oil painting of a yacht called the Mignonette. This is the boat that Dudley, Stephens, Parker, and Brooks were on. And what were they doing? Well, they were sailing from England to Australia because an Australian, a lawyer actually, had been visiting Falmouth, England, saw the mignonette, fell in love with it, bought it, and then had to figure out how to get it to Australia. He could have paid to have it shipped as deck cargo on a much bigger vessel. That would have been very expensive. Instead, he chose the cheaper option. He hired somebody to sail it for him. He hired Dudley to be the captain. Dudley hired Stephens to be the first mate, Brooks to be the able-bodied seaman, and Parker to be the cabin boy. And they set sail. From Falmouth, England, the plan was to sail south along the coast of Africa, across the Atlantic Ocean, around the tip of South America, and then across the South Pacific to Australia. Unfortunately, they didn't get that far. This is July of 1884. As they're crossing the Atlantic, they run into a severe storm, probably an early season hurricane. They sail around it, trying to avoid the hurricane. That doesn't work. And eventually, the mignonette is overcome by the storm, and it sinks. The four men scramble into a lifeboat. They have a little dinghy. And I'll picture this. They're in the middle of a hurricane big enough to sink the yacht they were on, and now they end up in a little dinghy. So from the frying pan into the fire. And they manage to survive the night in the dinghy, largely because of Dudley's expert seamanship. If you know anything about sailing, he used a sea anchor. I can explain to you later what that is. But that enabled them to survive the night, riding up and down over the waves in the hurricane. And they wake up the next morning, and somebody tell me where they are. Hope.
They're by the Cape of Good Hope.
Yeah. No coincidence there. Well, sort of by the Cape of Good Hope? Or
about 1,600 miles off.
It's not that close.
No.
1,600 miles from the Cape of Good Hope. And how far away from the nearest land are they?
About 1,000.
About 1,000 miles. That puts them right about there. Okay? Cape of Good Hope is actually the tip of Africa. And believe it or not, that is about as far away from land as you can be on planet Earth. The Pacific Ocean is a lot bigger than the Atlantic, but the Pacific Ocean has a lot of islands. And 1,000 miles away from land is about as far away as you can be, and they are in deep trouble. They are hundreds of miles from the shipping lanes. They wake up the next morning. Hope, do they have any food or provisions with them?
They just have some cans of turnips.
Yeah, 2 cans of turnips, 1 pound each, and that's it. They have no water. The only thing they were able to grab as they scrambled off the mignonette were these 2 cans of turnips, and Dudley grabbed a little box that had his compass and sextant in it so they could navigate or figure out where they were. Also had his pocket knife, which would come in handy later. And as Danielle said, they were in the boat for how many days? Yeah, about 20 days before they resorted to cannibalism to survive. They had the turnips. Did they get any other food, Hope?
No, I don't think so.
No. They got something. Yeah, right behind Hope. What's your name? Kiana. Into the microphone.
They found a small turtle and they ate that for
They
a few
found
days.
a turtle and they ate it. The way the court describes what happens in this case is a little bit confusing. Sometimes the court uses dates. Sometimes the court tells you how many days they were in the lifeboat. Sometimes it counts forward. Sometimes it counts backward. I want to put up a calendar so we can keep track of the 20 days and what was going on during that time. So they're sailing happily along in early July when they run into the hurricane, and they're shipwrecked on July 5th. They wake up the next morning. All they have is 2 cans of turnips. They ration that carefully, but it only lasts about 24 hours. And by day 2, the turnips are gone. Okay? They get the turtle on day 4. Okay? Brooks, quite bravely, leaps over the side of the dinghy into the shark-infested waters, grabs the turtle with his bare hands, gets the turtle back in the boat, and then scrambles back in the boat before the sharks eat him. And then the 4 men set about eating the turtle. Okay? And they ate every piece of the turtle that they could. They ate the turtle meat, they ate the turtle brains, they sucked the marrow out of the turtle bones. They tried to eat the turtle shell and the turtle fingernails. That didn't work. They couldn't. And they made that turtle last all the way until day 12 in the lifeboat, day 11. So now imagine that, 11 days, all you've had to eat is a half a pound of turnips and your share of a raw turtle. But starvation was not their biggest problem. What do you think the biggest problem was? Hope. Dehydration. Okay. Dehydration was going to kill them much quicker than starvation would. Did they get any water while they were in the lifeboat? What's your name? Andres. They got a little bit of rain, but only a little. And the three survivors would later talk about being tantalized as they looked off in the distance and saw these rain clouds coming, and then they would veer off and miss them. They had rain slickers with them, and the couple times it did rain, they caught the rain and drank it, but that was it. It's the only water they had. And if you count backwards, you realize the last bit of water they had was on July 18th, day 13 in the lifeboat. Day 14, day 15, 16, 17. Think about this. 17 days in the lifeboat. What's today? Today's January 30th. Okay, so 17 days ago was January 13th, 2.5 weeks ago. Think about how much you've had to eat since then. Like, picture it. Think about how much you've had to drink since then. And now imagine replacing that with a few sips of water, a little bit of turnips, and some raw turtle. That's the situation they find themselves in. And so, on the 18th day, the three older men have a conversation. Okay? What's that conversation about? Somebody tell me. Yeah, right there in the front. Take the microphone.
They discuss that they have more to lose than the little boy does because they have families and they have people to return home to, so they decide that killing the boy is the best and pretty much only option at that point.
Okay, they don't get quite that far in the conversation on day 18, but over the course of a couple days, that's where they end up. Okay? On the first day, the court describes them as having a conversation about whether one of them should be sacrificed to save the rest. Nobody uses any names. But it was understood that they were talking about Parker, the cabin boy, as the one to be sacrificed. And tell me your name?
Nicolette.
Nicolette. So Nicolette, why was it understood by the three older men that if they were going to sacrifice one to save the three, that the logical one was the cabin boy?
Because the older men had families and they had, places to go home to and like jobs and I guess more of a reason to live.
Yeah, so here's one thing you have to understand to put this case in context. To our 21st century American ears, that sounds like a terrible way to pick the person who's going to get killed and eat. It's essentially a power dynamic. In 1884 in England, it would not have been read that way. And in fact, that fact is in this case as an exculpatory fact because the jury would have been sympathetic to that. Dudley and Stephens and Brooks were married. Brooks actually may have had more than one wife, which may have been why he was on the boat in the first place, trying to get to Australia. But at least as to Dudley and Stephens, upstanding, God-fearing British citizens, whereas Parker was an orphan. No one depended on him. He was illiterate. He was kind of a wild living youth. We would look at that and say, well, that's a terrible reason to pick him to be the sacrificial victim. Not so much in that time period. There was one other reason, though, why it was logical to them that Parker should be the one to be killed. In the pink shirt, just yell. We got a microphone right there. Tell us your name.
My name is Shayla.
Shayla.
And they figured that since he was a lot younger, he was going to die before them anyways because he was a little more... He was a little weaker than them from the starvation and the dehydration, so they figured he'd die before they would anyways.
It was apparent at day 18 that Parker was much closer to death. He wasn't a part of these conversations, in part because they excluded him, but in part because he's lying on the bottom of the dinghy at this point, only semi-conscious. And part of the reason for that might have been his age and might have been poverty. He might have been less well-nourished when they started the voyage, but it was also dehydration. Okay. Sailors at the time believed that seawater was poison. And if you drank seawater, there were all kinds of superstitions that sailors had. One of them was if you drank seawater, you would die, it would kill you. There's nothing wrong with seawater. It's not poison. But there is a problem with drinking seawater when you're dehydrated, and that it's salty. And so Parker, despite all of Dudley's admonitions not to drink seawater, was sneaking sips of seawater at night. And that was causing him to get dehydrated faster than the other men, and which is why he was an extremist at that point and closer to death. They don't decide to kill Parker that day. The next day, they have another conversation. And at this point, the conversation is about how to choose who should be the sacrificial victim. And they talk about drawing lots, essentially rolling dice or playing rock, paper, scissors to figure out who's going to be the person killed. And for the reasons we discussed, they decide that doesn't make any sense. If it's going to be anybody, it should be Parker. At this point, there's 3 men talking about it. Who's in favor of the killing? Who's opposed to it? Teresa, right next to you, the guy in the sweater. What's your name?
My name's Ivan.
Ivan.
And the ones that were for it was Dudley and Stephens, and then the one that kept denying and didn't want to do it, refusing, was Brooks.
Okay, so Dudley's proposing the idea. Stephens is in support. Brooks is against it. We don't actually know why Brooks was opposed, and it's interesting to speculate why. Maybe he was grossed out by the idea of eating somebody. Maybe he thought it was immoral to kill and didn't want to be part of it. Maybe he was afraid of being prosecuted and punished and didn't want to be part of a killing for that reason. But Dudley says at the end, if there's no sail in sight to rescue us tomorrow, we got to do it, because otherwise we're not going to survive. They wake up the next morning, and there's no sign of rescue. So Dudley takes his pocket knife, goes up to Parker, wakes him up, boy, say your prayers, and then stabs him in the neck to kill him. Why do you think he killed him that way? Yeah, in the front row in the seat there with the pink scarf. Tell us your name.
My name's Amanda. I believe it'd be a way for him to bleed out the most because that's a major artery.
And why was bleeding out important to Dudley and Stephens?
I feel like it's a quicker way for him to die, and B, they're dehydrated, so they'd be able to drink his blood.
Exactly. Their priority was drinking his blood. And there's sort of a anatomical mistake they made that's also important to understand. Sailors at the time believed that once someone's heart stops beating, their blood would congeal and become solid instead of liquid, and then they couldn't drink it. That's not true on multiple levels. It doesn't congeal that fast, and even if it does congeal and you eat it, you're getting the same amount of hydration. They didn't understand that. And that also explains why they believed it was important to kill Parker and not to wait for him to die. They believed, wrongly, but they believed, if they waited for him to die, they wouldn't be able to drink his blood. So Dudley stabs him in the neck, uses the box to collect the blood, drinks it, gives it to Stephens, who drinks it. What about Brooks? Amanda, does Brooks partake?
No.
Does he end up eating Parker?
I know I can't remember if he ate him or not.
He does.
Think they
It's the only way he survives, right? So Brooks was against the killing, but not against the eating. After they drink the blood, they cut off Parker's head and throw it overboard, kind of out of respect. And then they proceed to eat him. Right? And by eating him, survive the day. And wake up the next day and eat more of him, and more of him, and more of him, until, miraculously, 5 days later, a German ship called the Montezuma happens by, and they are rescued. Now, granted, they're hundreds of miles from the shipping lanes, so it was complete chance that this ship happened by. The captain of the German ship had heard there were mermaids in the area, and he was hunting for mermaids. I don't make this up. This is the 1800s. And instead of mermaids, he found Dudley, Stephens, Brooks, almost dead, the remains of Parker. There was no secret about what had happened. The 3 men did not try to conceal what happened. Once they recovered their strength enough on the Montezuma, they freely shared the story. When they got back to Falmouth, England, weeks or months later, they were greeted, maybe not quite as heroes, but as miraculous survivors of a terrible ordeal. The Home Office in London, the head prosecutor, didn't take quite the same view of the case, and in fact had been looking for a cannibalism on the high seas case to bring and prosecute. And so Dudley and Stephens were charged with murder. Okay. That's what you have in front of you, is the jury's verdict from the trial. If you turn the page over and look at the second half of the case, you have the jury's findings. Now, ordinarily in a criminal case, the jury sits there silently and never says anything until the case is over, and then they say only one word or 2 words, guilty or not guilty. Here, highly unusual procedure, the jury actually issues a set of findings. They don't reach a verdict. And here are the jury's findings. That if the men had not fed upon the boy, they probably would not have been picked up and rescued, but instead would have died of starvation. That the boy was likely to have died first because he was in much weaker condition. That at the time of the act in question, meaning the killing, there was no sail in sight nor any reasonable prospect of relief. They had no reason to think that if they waited, they'd get rescued. Under the circumstances, there appeared to the prisoners, that's Dudley and Stephens, every probability that unless they then fed or very soon fed upon the boy or one of themselves, they would die of starvation. And here's the key finding. There was no appreciable chance of saving life except by killing someone for the others to eat. And this is what I want us to engage with. The jury sat through the trial, heard the evidence, and reached these findings. So we can't argue with that. We can't say, oh, if they had waited, they might have been rescued sooner. Or if they had waited, they might have survived until the Montezuma came along. No, the jury concluded there was no appreciable chance of saving life except by killing someone for the others to eat. If they had not eaten Parker, they would have died. So what do we do? On the one hand, we have Thomas Dudley, brave captain, accomplished seaman, whose leadership unquestionably kept the men alive in the boat for 19 days. On the other side, you have Richard Parker. That's not a tombstone. His remains never made it back to England, but it's a memorial stone placed by Parker's brother. Here's the inscription on it. And if you look at the 2 Bible verses that Parker's brother put on the memorial stone, you get a sense of what Parker's brother thought should happen to Dudley and Stephens. What do you think should happen to Dudley and Stephens? Here's the question. And this is not a question of law or legal doctrine, just a punishment question. I want to see a show of hands. How many of you think Dudley and Stephens should be punished rather severely for what they did in the lifeboat, for killing Parker? Raise your hands. Okay, how many of you think they should not be punished? Okay, a whole bunch of you didn't raise your hands. Everybody's got to raise their hand for one of those 2 choices. I'm not giving you a middle ground. Let's do it again. How many of you think Dudley and Stephens should be punished rather severely for what they did? Raise your hands. Okay, I'm guessing that's 40% of you. And how many think that they should not be punished severely, in fact, not punished at all? At least 60% of you. So we got a pretty good even split. Now I want to find out why. So Carolina, Peggy's going to give you a microphone. What do you think should happen to Dudley and Stephens?
I think they should be punished
Okay, why?
because they killed someone.
Simple as that. They killed someone. That's actually not a bad answer. Right? Thou shalt not kill. It's the 5th commandment. It's sort of the first moral principle in any moral system, in any organized society. So, Carolina, let me give you a hypothetical. Imagine after this class, end of the day today, I'm leaving. I get in my car, I back up very carefully. I'm driving out of campus, sunny day, I don't have the radio on, I'm not texting, I'm paying careful attention, and some freshman darts out from between 2 parked cars right in front of me, and I hit him and kill him. Will I be guilty of murder?
No,
But I just killed somebody. Thou shalt not kill.
that was an accident. You didn't do it on purpose.
Okay, so thou shalt not kill intentionally.
Intentionally.
If it's an accident, it's okay. Okay. Let me give you another hypothetical. What's your name? Christine. Christine? Christina? Christine. You can keep the microphone because I'm asking Carolina the question. Imagine I am a deranged law professor in a state, an open carry state where everybody brings guns to class. And this is my gun. And I decide, as part of the homicide lesson, it would be good to demonstrate to people how a homicide works and what it's like. So I take my gun, and I'm pointing it at Christine, and I'm about to kill her. Christine, you got a gun. So here you go. There's your gun. What are you going to do with your gun? How? You better decide quickly, because I'm about to shoot you. You're going to use it on me and hope to kill me, right? Well, what's better, you or me? Who would you rather die? You're going to shoot me. Is Christine going to be guilty of murder?
No.
She killed me intentionally.
Self-defense.
Oh, okay. So we got a rule. It's a little bit of legal doctrine. We got a rule. Don't kill. We added a mental state. Don't kill intentionally. We created an exception. It's okay to kill intentionally if you're killing in self-defense. Okay? But in terms of the core arguments for why Dudley and Stephens should be punished, Carolina gave it to us. There it is. They took an innocent life, and therefore they deserve punishment. Now, a whole bunch of you thought they shouldn't be punished. Why? Somebody give me an argument as to why, bless you, why they shouldn't be punished. What's your name? Adriana. Whoop, wait a minute. Gotta turn it on.
Okay. I feel like they shouldn't be punished because it technically would be in self-defense because it's survival instinct to try your best to hold out. And if you think about it, any one of them could have been the one to die to be like the food.
Okay, I'm going to push you on clarifying your argument.
Yeah.
You say technically it's self-defense. Well, of course, it's not self-defense.
Right.
Because self-defense is defending yourself from someone who is an immediate danger to you.
Right.
And Parker was not a danger to the other men.
Okay.
You also talked about the instinct for self-survival. Are you saying that the killing was justified, as in they did a good thing, or that it's excused? They did a bad thing, but you understand why they did it and you don't want to blame them for it.
I'm saying it's excused. I'm not saying it's justified because, hey, we all, again, Bible, thou shalt not kill. But it is justified because it was...
It's not justified. It's excused.
Oh, excused, sorry. Yeah, it was excused.
Because they shouldn't be blamed for the choice they made. Okay, I can almost put that up as another exception to thou shalt not kill. When you kill accidentally, like me running over a freshman, I didn't make a choice. Now, somebody who kills accidentally while driving recklessly has made a choice to drive in a non-careful way. I haven't made a blameworthy choice, so I'm not going to be blamed or guilty of a crime. And what's your name?
Adriana.
Adriana's making an analogous argument for Dudley and Stephens. Not that the killing was an accident, but they shouldn't be blamed for the choice because the extreme situation in which they found themselves really left them with no choice. That's the survival instinct.
Yeah.
And if that thou shalt not kill sounds like a religious rule based on vaguely religious notions of the sanctity of life, so's this, right? If you think about a crime as a sin, well, you wouldn't blame somebody for doing something bad if it wasn't their choice. Okay? So notice what's going on here. Carolina made a good argument, and Adriana responded with another good argument. Now I want to hear somebody justify this killing. Right? There's an argument there. Adriana didn't make it. I want to hear somebody make it. Let me come back to Danielle.
When they were deciding whether or not they should eat someone, they did make a course of action where they didn't specify that they were going to kill Richard, but they said that let's make a draw, so it was going to be fair. And then when they did end up killing Richard Parker, he didn't say no.
Consent.
Turn around. Now I'm going to kill her. Don't tell her, and she's not going to say no. Is that going to be okay?
Well, he saw that it was going to happen. He didn't put up a fight.
He was half comatose. They woke him up. And actually, they didn't draw lots. They talked about drawing lots, but they didn't. They decided to go ahead. Okay. Christine. Wait, let me get your microphone.
Yeah. I'll do that.
What would be the argument for justifying this killing?
Someone could use the argument that in utilitarianism, they were trying to do the greater good for the greater amount of people. So it was one life versus all those other lives that they were trying to save.
Greatest good for the greatest number. And you referred to a school of philosophical thought there, utilitarianism. Explain to me what that means. It's not a philosophy class. Give me the basics of what would be a utilitarian argument, because that's what greatest good for the greatest number is. It's an argument based on utilitarian principles.
Can I give like a hypothetical?
Yeah.
Okay, so like if there's like the coronavirus and there's a bus filled with people that have it, and they're going to this new city with thousands upon thousands of other people, and the government says if you want to save all those people, you kind of have to get rid of all the people in the bus. You know, like some people may say it's really wrong to kill those people, but it may be even more wrong to kill all those thousands upon thousands just by letting them in.
Okay, let's try to measure those wrongs. Killing the people on the bus is wrong.
That is wrong.
Because why? Quantify it. What would you say is the harm from killing the people on the bus?
Well, it's like morally like objectionable. Like you can say that they have families too and that they've got lives too.
So I'm going to push you a little bit. We're making a utilitarian argument. I don't care about morals.
Okay.
I'm calculating costs and benefits.
Okay.
And if I blow up the bus, what's the cost?
You lose maybe like 100 lives on that bus.
So it cost me the cost of one missile and much more significantly 100 lives. Okay. What's the benefit?
They don't bring in the disease, and they don't kill thousands.
Saving thousands of lives in the big city.
Right.
Okay. Utilitarian arguments are cost-benefit arguments. Right. And so I'll put this up here. The theories underlying these two types of arguments are retributive theories and utilitarian theories. If we were to connect this to philosophy, retributive theories kind of go back to Immanuel Kant, 17th century, 18th century Enlightenment philosopher, who argued about or spelled out a theory of just deserts. When someone commits a wrong, they deserve to be punished. And just deserts doesn't come from like ice cream. It comes from getting what you deserve. No more, no less. And how do you decide what someone deserves? Well, there's two ways to argue about it. Carolina pointed us to the harm. Dudley and Stephens deserved to be punished because they killed somebody. They took an innocent life. Adriana pointed us to their decision and said, they shouldn't really be blamed because they had no food for 19 days. They were in this extreme situation, and it's understandable because you would have done the same thing if you were in the lifeboat, right? Yeah. Let me ask you a question. If you were in the lifeboat, who would you have been? Dudley, bold and decisive, taking action to save others' lives. Brooks, against it? Nope. Immoral, I don't want to do that. Would you have been Stephens? Not willing to kill, but like, go ahead. Dudley, you do it. Probably Stephens. That's probably what I would have been in the boat too. And that's how you decide how much punishment someone deserves. What was the harm? And what was the level of culpability? Right? If I accidentally run somebody over, the harm is great, but the culpability is low because it was an accident. If I purposefully, or let's say after I run over the freshman, I panic and I flee the scene. Right? Now, I did that on purpose. My culpability is pretty high. What's the harm? It's not that great. It's not nearly as severe as killing somebody. I would get punished for that, but it wouldn't be like getting punished for being a murderer because the harm is much less, fleeing the scene. Utilitarian arguments are not about punishment. They're about the future. They're what are called consequentialist arguments. Jeremy Bentham, more or less a contemporary of Kant in England and the Enlightenment, was the great utilitarian philosopher. And greatest good for the greatest number is the organizing principle. It's a cost-benefit analysis. Do whatever makes the world better. And so in Dudley and Stephens' case, who's my utilitarian here? Christine. We got 4 guys in a lifeboat. What did Dudley and Stephens do?
He decided to take like
They
one.
They killed one. Okay, so they killed one. If they hadn't killed that one, what would have happened?
Maybe they would have all died anyways.
All 4 would have died. Not maybe. The jury's verdict is that's what would have happened. All 4 would have died. So we have a world in which 1 person dies and a world in which 4 people die. Which world's better?
The one where the one person dies.
You could say greatest good for the greatest number. You could say lesser evil. These are both bad. This one's less bad. That would be the utilitarian argument. Okay. Carolina, you persuaded by that? Pardon me? A little bit. So what happened to your core principle of thou shalt not kill?
Oh, I don't want microphones. My core principle is still there. I still don't like this argument at all, really.
Okay, well, let me make it a little more concrete for you. Christine gave us the bus hypothetical. Let me put you in the hypothetical.
Okay.
So imagine you are the supreme leader of a very poor country.
Okay.
And one night you get a panicked call from your public health authorities. And they say, Madam Supreme Leader, we have terrible, terrible news. What's that? There's been a widespread outbreak of the novel coronavirus. And you say, oh crap, that's bad news, because let us say that the virus is 50% communicable and 20% fatal. Okay? Which means in any given population, 10% of the people are going to die if that virus gets introduced. You say, where is it? They said it's in a kind of a remote village. You say, okay, quarantine the village immediately, let nobody out. And they say, we did that. And you say, okay, good. 10% of the people in that village are going to die, but it's not going to spread. And they say, but we're sorry, the weekly bus left the village several hours ago, filled with 100 people. That's a big bus. Let's make it 30 people. And that bus is approaching the capital city. And you say, how close? They say 2 minutes away. And you know there's a bridge that leads over the river into the capital city. Now, it's a poor country. You don't have a big public health infrastructure. You don't have a big police force. You know you can't, like, call somebody and tell them to stop the bus that quickly. So everybody's sad. Your capital city has 100,000 people in it. 10% of them are going to die if this bus gets into the city. Okay. So you hang up the phone. Right next to that phone is a red phone that you know connects you to your friends in the CIA. Your country and the US are allies. Okay. And you know that the CIA and the NSA has armed unmanned drones in the area. And you could pick up the phone and say, quick, blow up the bridge, which will cause the bus to go like this, killing all 30 people on the bus, saving 10,000 people in your capital city from dying from the coronavirus. What would you do?
I'd call the red phone.
You'd
blow
call
up
the red phone.
bridge.
Okay, so this principle of thou shalt not kill just got completely sacrificed on the utilitarian altar of cost-benefit analysis. Anybody disagree? Yeah, right in the middle. Hang on for a microphone. And I want you to tell me why you disagree, why you would not blow up the bridge to save the people in the city.
Well, my name is Sydney, but I have an issue with, I feel that with that scenario, you're kind of valuing a lesser amount of lives over more.
Sure, that's exactly what I'm doing. And let me try to do a little math for you. In my view, I'm speaking as the supreme leader, not as the law professor. Life is sacred. And every life is of almost infinite value. And those of you who are mathematicians know why I say almost infinite, not infinite. But when I do the math, 30 times almost infinity is a big number. 10,000 times almost infinity is a much bigger number. And I'm not saying that these people's lives are more valuable than these people's lives. I'm just saying I have a chance to save much more life. What if you were the director of infrastructure for a developing country, and you knew, based on statistical analysis, that given kind of primitive or early developing construction principles in your country, every time you build a hospital, 2 people on average die in the construction process. But hospitals allow you to save hundreds and eventually thousands of lives. Would you build hospitals?
Yes.
Okay. How's this scenario different?
Because I think that you should let the outcome play out. Like, you shouldn't, I think you're getting involved in hypothetical. We don't know yet.
Wait a minute, this is law school. That's all we do is get involved in hypothetical.
But what if, okay, we said that we would blow up the bridge, and let's say that
and
the bus does fall.
kill Identifiable people.
Right, and it falls into the ocean, but who's to say that's not going to stop the contamination? So it's like you're still.
Well, okay, who's to say? The law professor is to say. In other words, the reason we think through these problems with hypotheticals is not to trick people, but to force us to identify the principles from which we are arguing, right? So Carolina said, here's a principle. Life is sacred, thou shalt not kill. And I said, okay, that's a good principle. But then I came back to her with a hypothetical that made her give up on that principle, at least when the numbers get big enough that you're talking about saving thousands of lives. Christine, you're a utilitarian. You like this calculation. So kill 1 to save 3 is a good thing. Let me give you a hypothetical.
Okay.
Imagine that I am a world-renowned transplant surgeon, and I have 4 patients. Adriana, Savannah, Andres, and Kathleen. Adriana, Savannah, Andres, and Kathleen. Adriana needs a lung. Savannah needs a lung. Andres needs a heart. Kathleen needs a liver. Okay? And I know, because I'm such a good transplant surgeon, they're young, otherwise healthy, extraordinarily good candidates for transplants. They're likely, if they get the transplant, to live long, healthy lives. But if they don't get the transplant, they're not going to last the day. Okay? And I'm waiting. I'm watching the list. I'm calling the hospitals. Nothing's coming across the transom. I'm checking the weather reports, hoping for rain, icy conditions, maybe motorcycle accidents are good for transplants. Nothing's happening. Okay? And then you walk into my office. And I say, Christine, how old are you?
I'm 19.
How old?
19.
19. Healthy?
Yeah.
Yeah? You don't smoke?
No.
Okay, so lungs are good. Exercise a little bit.
Yeah.
The heart's good. Don't drink too much.
No.
Think about this. I could harvest Christine's organs. That's what they call it. That would have the effect of ending her life. And I could save 1, 2, 3, 4 lives. Quick. Should I be allowed to do that?
I mean, with like the consent of the person.
Well, yeah, but you're not going to consent.
Well, that's not right.
So quick. Should I be allowed to do that? Be quicker.
No.
Of course not.
No.
Of course not.
No.
So, but now the question is, why not? And so, Carolina, why not? Because her life is in jeopardy. Yeah, her life is sacred. We can't take that life. So one argument against my kill 1 to save 4 is the retributive argument that a life is sacred and it doesn't matter what you're going to accomplish. I don't care what the consequences are. You can't take that life. That's the retributive argument. That would be Immanuel Kant's argument. But if you're a utilitarian, this is harder. But from a utilitarian perspective, there's still a good argument that killing you against your will to save these 4 is a bad idea and should be illegal. What's that argument? Why would it be bad, a bad rule, to allow doctors to do that? One argument is it's just wrong. I get it. But now let's come up with the utilitarian argument. And this is why we use hypotheticals. Because, and the essential skill we're working on is taking an argument and putting it in a box so you understand what the argument is. So then you can decide how to respond to it or how to make it better. Okay? So I've come up with a hypothetical. I'm going to kill 1 person against her will, an innocent person, to save 4 lives. How do we respond to that? Carolina gives us one response. Thou shalt not kill. I want now a utilitarian response. Carlos, way in the back. Wait for the microphone. And tell us why it would be bad to allow doctors to involuntarily harvest organs.
Why it would be bad?
Yeah.
Why it would be bad?
Yeah. Should I be allowed to do that?
No, because in that hypothetical, I don't think it's as extreme as what we face with that city or what we face.
Yeah, but I made it pretty analogous to Dudley and Stephens, right? This was kill 1 to save 4. That was kill 1 to save 3.
Yeah, but
Do
like
the numbers have to be in the thousands before you're willing to take an innocent life? Right? So
But-
maybe it's just a matter of degree. That's where I got Carolina to go.
Then again, like I said, it wasn't like with Parker where it was like he was gonna die. He was gonna she's perfectly healthy. She has all this. It's not as
All right,
extreme.
I'm going to pause for a minute there because Oscar just made an argument we haven't heard yet. Parker was going to die anyway. Where does that argument fit? Are you arguing that Dudley and Stephens deserve less punishment because Parker was close to death?
Yes, more or less. That's what.
Okay. When we talk about desert, we're looking at either what was the harm they caused or what was the culpability with which they did it. What was their decision? So it sounds to me, Oscar, like you're arguing Parker was about to die, so this wasn't much harm.
It was. I don't think it was. It was still a hard decision, but it kind of made it easier, if that
Because
makes
all they did was hasten his death.
more or less.
He was going to die
yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, I got news for you. That's all a murderer ever does. We're all going to die. It's true. We don't know when. Might be in 5 minutes, might be in 5 years, might be in 50 years. Be optimistic. Might be in 100 years.
Yeah, but
And we don't have to have this argument now. Is it really a lesser harm to kill someone who's closer to death? Should someone who murders an 80-year-old get a lesser punishment than someone who kills a 20-year-old? Carolina, what do you think? Life is sacred, life is life. They're all of equal value. That'd be one argument. I get where you're coming from, Oscar. It does fit our intuitions that it's a little less bad. It's a little less harm to kill somebody who is that close to death. Okay. Now let's get back to my utilitarian question. What's the utilitarian argument? What's the cost-benefit argument against letting me involuntarily harvest somebody's organs? Teresa, right in the aisle there with the jacket. Yep.
So they're Khalid, like salad Khalid.
Thank you,
So
Khalid.
thank you, no problem. So me, if I was representing this case, I would say, okay, so greatest good for the greatest number, which means, okay, you save a bunch of people. But what I would say would be,
Pause for a minute. Because this is where I want to lead you. Utilitarian arguments are all about consequences. So I don't want to hear you say what I deserve. I want to hear you say how the world will be affected. What will the future look like if I do this? Go ahead. I just threw you off your argument. So now say what you were going to say.
so what I was gonna say is that you mentioned the 80-year-old and the 20-year-old kid. So if the 80-year-old was about to die, in some states it's like self-assisted suicide where you can like ask him, hey, do you want us to kill you? Like you want us to inject you with? So I would argue this as Mr.
That's consent.
Okay, and you could
and of course,
say
consent in a state that allows euthanasia or assisted suicide, the age doesn't matter. There are other factors, suffering and close to death, where we will, as a society, if you're in one of these states, make the view, okay, this is not a great harm because this person is suffering, this ends the harm, and it's their choice. But go on.
So I would say they could say in their defense, hey, Richard wanted us to kill him because he was sick.
That would work if he did. But I don't think anybody asked Richard if he wanted them to kill him. Okay, back to my transplant hypothetical. Hope, what do you think? Peggy's got a microphone.
Dear Lord. All right. My argument against it is that, well, medically, there's no guarantee that the transplants will take.
Except I said in my hypothetical, and I'm the law professor, and I get to make the hypotheticals hard for you. They're gonna live long, healthy lives. It's gonna work. And so, here's what, think about Dudley and Stephens. Inevitably, there's uncertainty in these questions. What's remarkable about this case and what makes it hard to decide, a good teaching tool and hard for us, is it seems as if Dudley and Stephens got it exactly right. They waited 19 days before they killed the cabin boy. That's remarkable. One, that they survived, and two, they were able to wait that long. And then, by killing him, they managed to keep themselves alive for another 5 days, and then they got rescued. This could have happened so many other ways, but the way it happened frames this utilitarian question for us kind of perfectly. So go with me on my hypothetical. Imagine it's 20 years later, and you're deciding if I should be punished, and Christine's dead, and my patients are all like writing letters of recommendation for me. Let me ask the question this way. If you lived in a society where doctors could involuntarily harvest their patients' organs, how would that affect your behavior?
I wouldn't trust you.
So
I
you
wouldn't
wouldn't trust your doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what would that cause? How would that affect your behavior? What would you do?
I wouldn't go to the doctor
You
if
might
I'm
not
sick.
go to the doctor. Okay, now let's think about the cost-benefit analysis. 4 dead patients. That's a big harm. 300 million people afraid to go to the doctor. That's probably a bigger harm. Okay? And think about this too. How would you feel if you lived in a society where that was possible? Hope, how would you feel? Quick, emotional reaction.
Pissed off.
Okay, angry. Christina, how would you feel? Carolina, how would you feel?
Terrified.
Scared. Okay, that's intangible, but that's a real cost. Think about a society where everybody's scared. A utilitarian would have to add that to the cost-benefit calculation and might decide the act here seems justified. The rule is a completely terrible rule, and we shouldn't have a rule that allows that. Now think about rules in Dudley and Stephens. If you punish Dudley and Stephens, are you accomplishing anything in the future?
No.
Hope says no. Somebody give me the argument, the utilitarian argument, that by punishing Dudley and Stephens, we can accomplish a good in the future. Thrasher, take the microphone, tell us your name.
My name is Yusuf.
Yusuf.
And by punishing them, you set the standard. So, you know, in a scenario, maybe...
Standards are good, but why? What do standards do?
I mean, it puts a rule in place. So people know in the future that it's not acceptable to kill someone, even if you're dying of starvation
Okay,
or...
it's not acceptable, but we actually hope it changes their behavior, right?
Yes.
And we hope the next time there's sailors in a lifeboat and they're tempted to eat the cabin boy, what do?
They don't.
They don't. In the criminal law, we call that deterrence. Okay? And a major utilitarian argument justifying punishment is deterrence. We're going to punish this defendant now, whether or not they deserve it, because we want to deter other people in the future from committing that crime. Eating the cabin boy, let's say. Now, what's your name?
Yusuf.
Yusuf is making a utilitarian argument about deterrence. How do you respond to that? One response would be, what they did was justified, it was good, they don't deserve punishment, and therefore, even if you're going to accomplish something great in the future, it's unfair to punish them. Immanuel Kant would say that. No man should be used as a means for another man's end. Okay? But what about from a utilitarian standpoint? Do you think deterrence would work in this case? Yeah, on the aisle. What's your name?
Ashley.
Ashley.
Yeah. I feel like it wouldn't, because then it would allow other sailors to be more careless and be like, well, if they were able to do it, why can't we?
Okay, so that argument is if we don't punish Dudley and Stephens, the next group of sailors might not wait 19 days. They might take a few bites of turtle, be disgusted, and start eyeing the cabin boy. So we punish Dudley and Stephens, so in the future, sailors won't eat the cabin boy. Let me ask you this question. Ashley, you're in the lifeboat.
Okay.
19 days. And let's say you have a cell phone. And you call your friend who's a lawyer and say, if we eat the cabin boy, what's going to happen? And they say, let me do a little bit of research. They call you back and say, well, in 1884, Dudley and Stephens ate the cabin boy, and they were convicted of murder and punished. So don't eat the cabin boy. And you hang up. And now you're like, die of starvation, eat the cabin boy, and get punished. What do you think you do?
They're both not good, but I would probably eat the cabin boy.
Yeah, I probably would too. Notice how this argument goes. Yusuf makes the argument, deterrence is a reason to punish Dudley and Stephens. Okay? We can respond by saying, deterrence is not going to work here. Because the next time someone finds himself in this situation, they're just going to eat the cabin boy anyway. So you're not actually accomplishing anything by punishing Dudley and Stephens, and the cost-benefit calculation doesn't work out in your favor. Ashley could respond by saying, you know what? 19 days, they might eat the cabin boy. But we could still accomplish something by, at day 12 and day 15, getting them to wait as long as possible. And we might save the lives of future cabin boys by punishing Dudley and Stephens now. I'm going to stop for a minute and step out of character to show you what we just did and talk with you about that. You guys did a great job. And what we did through the course of 35 minutes or so is elucidate all of the main arguments for and against punishing Dudley and Stephens from both retributive and utilitarian theories. In my criminal law class, we're not talking about Immanuel Kant and Jeremy Bentham because we care about philosophy. We're doing it because I'm training my students to make arguments. And retributive theories create arguments about punishment. Utilitarian theories create arguments about crime prevention. Okay? And with regard to punishment, we're typically arguing about harm and culpability. What did they do, and with what level of mental state, to determine how much punishment they deserve? Harm and culpability. On the utilitarian side, the arguments are much more consequentialist. They're about cost-benefit. They're about making the world better in the future, largely by preventing crime. We do that through general deterrence, punishing Dudley and Stephens to deter other people. In other cases, you might talk about specific deterrence, punishing this defendant to deter that defendant from committing the crime again. Sometimes we talk about incapacitation or isolation, locking the defendant up so he can't commit this crime. The death penalty would be the ultimate incapacitation. And sometimes rehabilitation, using the criminal justice system and punishment to teach the defendant so the defendant learns the lesson and doesn't commit the crime again. All of those are the arguments that you make when you're a lawyer. When you're a prosecutor, arguing for a high sentence. When you're the defense lawyer, arguing for a low sentence or an acquittal. When you're a law student, arguing in class about what the law should be. Should the defense of necessity, greatest good for the greatest number, be available in a homicide case? That ends up being the legal question in Dudley and Stephens. Does anybody know how the Dudley and Stephens case came out? What was the result? Hope. Yeah, take the microphone. Were they found guilty or not guilty?
They were found guilty.
They were found guilty. What was the punishment for murder in England in 1884?
Death.
Death. Were they executed?
Nope.
No. No, actually what happened was they were found guilty, sentenced to death, and then about 6 months later pardoned by the Queen in a deal that was probably worked out ahead of time. And from the standpoint of criminal law theory, that's deeply unsatisfying, right? Did they deserve punishment or not? Did they do a good thing or not? But from the standpoint of practical reality, it's a pretty good result because these arguments conflict. And it's hard to decide. Carolina says, thou shalt not kill. But when confronted with the math calculation behind the utilitarian calculus, said, unless you can save a lot of people, it's hard. And the split the baby result here sort of accomplished both. You guys did a fantastic job playing the role of law students. I want to pause for a minute now and give you a chance to ask me questions instead of me asking you questions. I'll also point out I have with me the Dean of Admissions here at St. John's Law School, Dean Alicia Meehan. And I'm happy to answer your questions about the case, but also both of us are here and happy to answer your questions about law school, about preparing for law school, about applying to law school, about deciding where to go to law school, and so on. So questions, Andres. Question about the case. Peggy's going to give you a microphone.
Could they have used an argument based on the religious notion about the sacrificial lamb and Abraham and Isaac?
So it's not an argument. I mean, you can't like point to the Bible and say, the New Testament talks about Christ being a sacrificial lamb, but that was very much in their minds. They talked about this as a sacrifice. They even kind of conceptualized it as communion. In that Parker gave his life to save theirs. So at least metaphorically, that was definitely a part of the thinking and would have been a part of the shared language of the defense lawyers at the jury and the prosecutors at the time. Other questions? Yeah, in the middle. We won't wait for the microphone. In the back, second to last row. Just shout out your question nice and loud.
Did it take place on international waters? Because if so, then why were they trying to...
It took place in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but they were on a British flag vessel.
Okay.
even the lifeboat, is considered a British flag vessel, and the criminal jurisdiction of Great Britain would attach to that boat and the sailors. Other questions? Yeah, you've got a microphone. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I was just wondering, hypothetically, how different the case would be if, like, say, the boat picked them up the day after they had killed them.
Yeah, so the case would feel different. The jury had that finding. If they hadn't eaten the boy, they would not have survived long enough to be picked up and rescued. If the boat came along 4 days sooner, we wouldn't be sitting here saying Dudley and Stephens got it right. We would have been saying, if they only waited 1 day longer. So it might be fair to say, look, if you're going to kill somebody to eat him, you better get it right. And if it turns out you kill him too soon, or you kill him when it wasn't necessary, and the jury decides that, you're going to get punished. And that's a fair thing to add into the calculation. In fact, most necessity laws will do that. Other questions? Yeah. Right behind. Pass the microphone back.
So if Dudley and Stephens would have gotten the consent from Parker.
Consent changes everything.
Consent changes everything,
Actually,
exactly.
You can't legally consent to be killed.
I know.
But in terms of a moral calculation, if Parker were to consent, then it's a totally different case. Or if they drew lots and everybody agreed that whoever got the short straw was going to get killed, it's a different case. Questions about law school. Who has a decision about preparing for law school or applying to law school? Amanda? No. Adriana.
Okay, so I'm currently applying to law school right now, hopefully get it for the fall semester, and I was just wondering...
Yeah, take the microphone so everybody watching online can hear you.
Okay, hi.
No pressure.
Sure. I was just curious, when applying to law school and you're filling out your application, is there anything that law schools are looking for specifically in applicants? Like, what should I focus on most? Like, is it just about my grades or like?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's really two parts to it. In filling out your application, what do we look for? And for those of you who are not yet seniors, what should you be doing in college to make your application look as good as possible? Dean Meehan, you want to take a stab at answering that first?
So it's a mix of lots of different things. There's no stereotypical law student, and you all who are here, or anyone who's watching on YouTube, you'll see on our website, we have a review book. You'll see our entering class statistics towards the back. Our students come from all around the country, all around the globe. They've come from over 100 different colleges. They have 45 different majors. There's no typical or right law student. But you do want to make sure that you make yourself as competitive an applicant as you can. So while you're in college, you really want to focus on your courses. You want to make sure that you're doing well. If you are not in a major that makes you happy, think about what you enjoy. Usually students do better when they're in an area that they like, and there's no major you need to have to go to law school. You also really want to spend time and energy studying for the law school admission test, the Lsat, or we also accept the GRE here at St. John's. So that is the sort of national comparison we have to compare an applicant to several thousand other applicants nationwide. Your individual coursework and your performance in the classroom is going to reassure our faculty members here at St. John's that you're prepared for the rigor of law school. So those two factors weigh very heavily. We're also reading letters of recommendation from your professors. We're looking at your writing. You don't need to be involved in a certain group on campus or something like that, but we do ask for a resume because we want to see everything you've been doing, working, volunteering, that sort of thing. We want to see how you spend your time.
Yeah, I'll add to that. When I'm looking at an application, and I think this applies in St. John's and to a lot of other law schools, there are sort of 4 categories of things that are really important. Your LSAT score, because that allows us to, in a standardized way, compare students against each other. And we have a lot of history with that, and we understand how that score relates to how you're likely to perform in your first year. Your GPA, and I don't necessarily mean your entire undergraduate record. I'm talking about the number, the GPA, because that's an important metric we use both to predict and also to report. Like every law school, St. John's is really concerned with diversity. We want to increase the diversity of our student body across all metrics, so that's an important factor. And then what I call everything else, what Dean Meehan calls the holistic review of your file. Who are you? what obstacles have you overcome? What interests you? What animates you? And all of that is important. But don't miss the fact that I said the LSAT and the GPA are by themselves really important. So make sure, with regard to the LSAT, that you're giving yourself the time and the space to maximize your performance on that test. Prepare for it. Schedule it in a way that you have the space to prepare for it. It's a test where practice can make you better. And if you can't afford to sign up for a course, they can be kind of expensive. There are inexpensive and free options out there. The Law School Admission Council has partnered with Khan Academy. There's a whole series of lessons on the Law School Admission Council website that you can access for free, and that can be a way for you to maximize your score. And with regard to the major question, what should you do in college? I'll echo what Dean Meehan said. It doesn't matter what you major in. What matters is you learn to read, engage with complicated texts, think critically, and write. And you can do that in any major. Other questions about law school? Yeah, remind me of your name. Amanda. Yep. So Amanda is a second semester sophomore legal studies major.
Legal studies and history major, yes.
And history, great.
What is, being someone who is so young as me, what is your recommendation for how to study for the LSAT? How do you prep for LSAT? What are the requirements and the support system that someone like me, as young as I am, needs to succeed to become a law student?
So how do you study for the LSAT? The most important thing, in my view, is take practice LSATs. And take at least some of them in exam conditions. Time yourself. I think it's like 30 minutes a section, and there's 6 sections, something like that. 35 minutes a section. My daughter recently took the LSAT, and over the summer she took a course, but the course was useful mostly for 2 things. It gave her a schedule that forced her to stay on schedule, and gave her access to a whole bunch of practice tests. And I think she took 6 practice tests, like almost every Saturday morning. She'd lock herself in her room for 4 hours and do a practice test. And she said that was the single most important thing in terms of getting her used to the test and developing the skills to get through the various sections. You want to add anything to that?
No, except that the studying is all, like Dean Simon said, the LSAT is offered around 9 times a year. So you as a sophomore are in a great position to look at the calendar over the next year and see when you have availability to take this test. I would normally say to allot 6 to 9 months to prepare for the LSAT. So that doesn't mean all the time, but if you consider it as a part-time commitment, maybe 10 to 15 hours a week, it's going to take to get to the point where you feel like you can do your best. Most people who are not satisfied with their score often say that they just didn't have the time to study. So the tests for the 2020-2021 year have just come out, so you can get a sense of what makes sense for you. As a sophomore, I'd recommend taking it towards the end of junior year so that you have time to also take it in the summer if you wanted to take it again, or the fall of your senior year.
And let me add this about taking it again. When we look at your LSAT scores, we look at the highest one. We don't average them. So there's very little downside to taking it twice. And the Law School Admission Council, the test makers will tell you the standard deviation on an LSAT score is plus or minus 3 points. In other words, random chance could cause you to score 3 points higher or 3 points lower on any given day. So as you think about plotting out your LSAT schedule, really try to work into your schedule. You're going to take it twice. Now, if you take it the first time and you do way better than you had done in the practice tests, you might say, okay, that's where I'm going to stop. But generally, most of the applicants we see have taken it at least twice. We're going to, after this, be offering tours to anybody who wants to take a tour of St. John's. Obviously, if you're watching on YouTube Live, you can't do that. But I want to answer one more question before we wrap up and wrap the live feed, and that is about how to think about choosing a law school. Because some of you I know are applying in this application cycle. Others will be applying and making this choice next year. In comparing law schools, you want to look at outcomes. Okay? And by outcomes, I mean really 2 things: bar passage rates and employment rates. Okay? And it's actually very easy to compare law schools across those metrics. We all report these statistics on our websites on a standardized form in the exact same format. So it's relatively easy to see what law schools have higher bar passage rates, what law schools have higher employment rates. And then you're going to have reach schools, target schools, safety schools, based on their median LSAT and GPA scores. Right? And in your reach schools, you might get in. You're probably not going to get offered a lot of scholarship money. At your safety schools, you'll get in, and you might get offered a big scholarship. And your target schools somewhere in between. So then you'll have a series of options and choices, and you'll have to decide how important is it to me to go to this law school, which is going to cost me this amount of money, or this law school, which is going to cost me a lot less amount of money. And the way to think through that decision is to look at the law school's bar passage rates and employment rates. You don't want to go to law school and not pass the bar or get a job. And I say that not just because St. John's has a bar passage rate close to 90% and an employment rate over 92% and one of the highest in the country, but that's what's important to us and a real part of our identity and frankly why most of the students who come to St. John's choose us. The other thing to look at is culture. What is a law school like? What's my experience there going to be like? Am I going to fit in? Am I going to feel welcomed? That's harder to measure with data and reports. Visit schools. It can be hard to do if it involves traveling around the country, but you want to go to a school and get a feel for what it's like. Go through the cafeteria, see if the students seem to like each other. Sit in a class, see what it's like. Are the students engaged? Are the professors engaging? Here at St. John's, the culture is one that combines kind of academic rigor in the classroom with real support for our students around what is our overriding goal, and that is our employment outcomes. Getting our students that first job. And it's no exaggeration to say everything we do here, from the first moment of orientation when students show up until graduation, in the classroom and out of the classroom, is focused on that outcome. It's frankly why we have one of the highest employment rates in the country. It also has the benefit of making the culture here feel, to our students, because it is, extraordinarily supportive and caring. Our students know that everybody in the law school is behind them and supporting them and working with them towards the shared goal of ensuring when they graduate, they have the job that's going to launch their career. So we're going to take a break and turn off the live feed. I want to say goodbye to the YouTube Live audience.
And if anyone on YouTube Live wants to contact the admissions office, our email is lawinfo@stjohns.edu.
Thank you very much, everybody. You're a great audience.
And if you're here for the tour, we're going to have some tour guides come in, and you're welcome to come take a tour now, or you can always schedule a tour at another time with my